I think that the studies need to stop focusing on this stupid frickin' weight nonsense. Yeah, I said it. Yeah, I said it. Hello everybody, my name is Lana McCarthy. I am your friendly registered bull. Hello everybody, my name is Lana McCarthy. I am your friendly neighborhood dietitian with a master's in human nutrition, and welcome to another episode of Let Me Learn Ya. Today's episode is part 3 of my deep dive into the world of intermittent fasting. If you haven't watched part 1 or part 2, definitely check them out. In part 1, I chat about whether or not fasting is a fad, the history of fasting, the types of fasting, and how fasting affects your body on an insane metabolic level. Part 2, I sum up what all the evidence says about fasting and weight, BMI, fat and lean mass, insulin resistance, cardiometabolic effects, and even autophagy. And part 3, which is what you're watching now, if you haven't figured that out already from me telling you, I'm in a very strange mood. I had a lot of coffee. I had a lot of coffee. And I made it really strong. I will be giving you my educated opinion on intermittent fasting, as well as who I think should not attempt intermittent fasting. And because I know you're gonna do whatever you wanna do anyway, I am not an abstinence only channel. I am of the belief of sharing as much information with you as I can, because you're probably gonna do it. That's all there is to it. And because of that, I'm going to be sharing some tips that I think you should be aware of before you start intermittent fasting, when you're doing intermittent fasting, and what to consider while you're doing intermittent fasting. Science changes, science evolves, and because of that, we should always remain flexible in our thinking. There have been a lot of instances throughout history where science was too slow to catch up. Way back in the day, scientists and health professionals would call people insane and heretics for insinuating that there may be these invisible organisms that we can't see that were actually causing disease, and that it was super important for us to wash our hands after doing surgery, which I think is purely anti-science, because everything that I love about science is discovery, curiosity, challenging of commonly held beliefs, and making sure that that thing that we believe is true by pounding it hard with facts and studies. What my opinion is regarding fasting is probably in direct contradiction of what many of my colleagues think. I understand a lot of their concerns, and I do agree with many of the things that they say. I believe we should keep an open mind and have an open discussion, and not just automatically condemn something with vitriol and insults and condemnation because absolute perfect science doesn't exist in this moment. We're all human. We're all allowed to form different opinions based on what we have learned, and this is mine. Fasting interests me, and I'll tell you why. I am a curious freaking cat. I was the student in school throughout my entire nutrition education who hated the ethics classes, hated the nutritional counseling classes, but dropped me in a biochemistry class, a genetics class, a chemistry class, a metabolism class. I love finding out the whys of everything and understanding all the little things that our bodies do and how fasting can affect that. Secondly, I'm also somebody who is obsessively in love with nature. When science hasn't caught up or science is kind of weird, I tend to usually look to nature to be like, does this make sense? With regards to fasting specifically, what nature tells us is if anything is in imbalance, it's not good. Not having something at all or having something all the time. I mean, look at the sun and the rain. If we don't have the sun, we'll die. If we have it constantly, we die. If we don't have rain, we die. If there's too much rain, floods, we die. I believe that fasting or not eating all the time is literally how our bodies were designed to work. I believe this because of all the research we know about the human body. We know that it's supposed to shift between a fasted and fed state. And more recent research has showed that the less time you spend shifting between these two metabolic states, the more you start getting stuck in this kind of middle area, which is being termed as metabolic inflexibility. You want your body to make these hard shifts because it keeps your body metabolically flexible. Exercise helps you to make these hard shifts. Fasting or not eating and then eating later on. We are making those hard shifts less and less and less because we are exercising less, we are less physically active, and we are snacking more and later than we ever have before. All of that to say that fasting interests me because one, the potential impacts it has on our metabolism, and two, the potential it has to help our metabolism be flexible. The practice of fasting has been around for thousands of years, and it's still in use today in many different religions. And no crazy side effects have been reported from short-term bouts of fasting. The only worrying side effects that I could find were all tied with longer-term fasting or very severe, like water fasting or no food at all fasting. A headache is different from my pancreas stopped working. While decades ago, people could have stated there's not any evidence of this, we can't support it, there now is. There is a lot of evidence. In part 2, I shared multiple systematic reviews, meta-analyses that looked at hundreds of random control trials over thousands of participants and generally came to very similar conclusions. Intermittent fasting, depending on the type, is just as good at promoting weight loss as continuous energy restriction. And in some cases, such as modified alternate day fasting or the 5-2 diet, that it may be slightly superior. Research has also pointed to the fact that intermittent fasting improves lipidemic profiles, reduces blood pressure. Now, the only iffy thing about this is they're still trying to really identify, is it because of the weight loss people experience during intermittent fasting, or is it not? And lastly, it possibly can increase insulin sensitivity, although they're still trying to figure out, is it only improving insulin sensitivity in those who have metabolic dysregulation? But numerous studies have observed insulin sensitivity increasing, fasting blood glucose decreasing. There's something there. Now that's all well and good, but here are some of the issues that I have with intermittent fasting. Even though there's all this evidence, we are missing specific types of evidence. I can't sit here and poo-poo extremely restrictive diets for working short-term and not long-term without also considering that with intermittent fasting. We now have long-term data for restrictive diets to show that beyond year 1, usually by year 2, year 3, all the weight that individuals lost come back, if not more so. We do not have long-term studies regarding intermittent fasting. It could be that intermittent fasting is great at weight loss and improving all these metabolic markers, but only in the short term. Studies aren't that diverse. They tend to be in white individuals, people of very narrow age ranges. There needs to be more consistency in how these studies are being conducted so that when we do systematic reviews and when we do meta-analyses, there's not a bunch of, well, they defined intermittent fasting this way and this is how they perform this, and so we can't really come to a conclusion based on the evidence. We need to look at any type of impacts that fasting may have on women specifically, because some research has hinted that women may experience some negative effects that men would not. And lastly, I think that the studies need to stop focusing on this stupid frickin' weight nonsense. I personally think that fasting for weight loss is just silly. I think we need to shift our focus to how fasting affects the metabolism and how it affects the metabolism long term. So far, some research has shown that intermittent fasting specifically may affect hormones in a way that affect your hunger. For instance, the hormone ghrelin being lower later at night. We've seen in intermittent fasting studies people reporting that they're just not as hungry. And though many health professionals have the concern that fasting could lead to binging when they're allowed to eat, they just overeat. Researchers have actually seen the opposite of that, that people, even though they can eat whatever they want on their non-fasting days, they don't eat as much as they normally would, and they report just not feeling as hungry. We need to look at that. How does fasting affect hormones and satiety hormones? We also need to look at fasting with regards to regulation of circadian rhythm. Time-restricted eating in some short-term trials have shown that aligning your feeding habits with your normal circadian patterns can lead to a reduction in inflammation. Like, these are things that, and weight loss, okay? I wasn't gonna say it, but weight loss and inflammation. We need to be looking at autophagy. I know that my colleagues are like, screw the autophagy nonsense, but we need to figure that out. If all the benefits that we're seeing in animal studies could be happening in humans, we need to know about it, period. Throw your bias out the window. The other issue I have with intermittent fasting is that it doesn't teach you healthy eating at all. It doesn't teach you about nutrients or macronutrients or how to make food or anything like that. All it does is say, don't eat, eat. It still promotes the idea that weight loss is king and that weight loss equates to health. Losing excess fat on your body can help to improve your health, but how you go about doing that can harm your health, okay? We need to start thinking about health beyond freaking weight loss. So summed up overall, my informed opinion, after all the research that I've read, is that evidence thus far is showing that intermittent fasting could potentially be a tool in our little toolbox of promoting specific health changes in specific individuals. And I'm guessing it's just a matter of time at this point that the consensus starts shifting. I would not recommend that people with type 1 or type 2 diabetes attempts fasting unless they are under strict supervision of their healthcare professional. Some research studies have shown that people with type 1 or type 2 diabetes experienced hypoglycemic episodes if their medication and their exercise routines were not adjusted during their fasting period. If you're somebody who experiences any type of dysregulation of blood sugar, because diabetes isn't the only one, right? We've also got PCOS. We've got people who experience hypoglycemia, post-meal hypoglycemia. When you're fasting, that is definitely going to affect your blood sugar. If you're somebody who requires like a small snack every 2 to 3 hours, this ain't for you. If you are somebody who takes medications with food, and you have to take those medications 1 to 2, 3 times a day, fasting is not going to work for you. You should not be stopping your medications unless your healthcare professional explicitly tells you that it's okay. Anybody who is in an active growth stage, I mean, this should be obvious, but infants, babies, toddlers, adolescents should not be restricting food. Anyone who is pregnant, breastfeeding, anything like that. People who are already underweight. That's a big one. If you are in any type of disease state or medical treatment where weight loss will exacerbate where you are at, do not do the intermittent fasting. Anyone who has a history of eating disorders, currently has an eating disorder, or is starting to head down that path, this type of eating behavior could possibly just worsen your current situation or trigger something that you thought was gone but was kind of lying dormant. Lastly, and I shockingly don't see a lot of people warn about this, people who don't know much about nutrition. If you are somebody who, eats out a lot, you don't really know much about food, you don't know about the macro and micronutrients that you should be getting to stay healthy and safe, you probably shouldn't be attempting intermittent fasting depending on the type of regimen, because you might harm your body in some way. You might develop a nutrient deficiency or something like that. Let's say you're not any of those people. You've watched all my videos, you've heard my warnings, you've heard my this is good, but this is blah, and you're like, screw it, I'm ready to go. Let's do this. Here are some tips and some things to look out for if you're going to start fasting. First and foremost, always talk to your healthcare provider, your dietitian, whoever who is an actual trained professional before you attempt to start any type of diet, any type of fasting protocol. Always talk to them first, because there may be things that you think are okay for fasting that they know are not. So speak with them first. If your healthcare provider is like, cool, ready to go, you're good, you're a normally healthy individual, have fun fasting, I don't know, then I highly recommend investigating all the different types of fasting. So go watch part 1. I think that's the one where I talk about it, yeah. And figure out which one works best within your current lifestyle and what you're trying to achieve. Do not just jump into the freaking deep end and be like, okay, well, I want to try fasting, so I'm going to do a stinking water fast for 30 days. Like, first of all, research isn't good on that one, just FYI. But if you're like, okay, I want to do time restricted eating, for instance, don't start with the 16-8. Just start with, I'm not going to snack after dinner. It's that easy. And see how that feels. And once you get comfortable with that, you can test lengthening that window a little bit by like an hour or so and see how that works. If you want to do the 5-2 diet, why don't you just try doing one day out of the week to start? Depending on the type of fast that you're attempting, you might also want to consider using a multivitamin temporarily just to make sure that all your bases are covered, especially if you're somebody who doesn't really understand nutrition that well and you don't know how to get all the nutrients that you need on the days or the hours that you are feeding. Make sure that you are meeting your protein requirements. And if you really are concerned about losing lean mass, you might also want to consider doing some sort of resistance training on the days or the hours that you are fed. When you have a feeding day, do not gorge on unhealthy foods. Fasting is not an excuse to, for lack of a better word, starve yourself so then you can gorge on whatever the foods you want to gorge on. On your fed days, include a variety of healthy foods, nutrient-dense foods, foods that you enjoy. Eat some fruits, vegetables, whole grains, dairy, whatever's usually in your diet. On your fast days, make sure that you're drinking plenty of fluid. Non-caloric beverages are generally considered to be okay, such as tea, black coffee. There's all kinds of arguments kind of going on about that, but I'm like, like I said, better things to worry about. There are people dying, Kim, okay? Now, warning signs for when you should absolutely cease and desist what you are doing and call up your freaking healthcare provider. Most likely this is not going to happen with short-term bouts of fasting. These types of symptoms have only been reported in longer-term types of fasting, but I don't know what you guys are doing in your life, so I just want to make sure that you know the symptoms to look out for when something has gone awry. If you experience extreme nausea that lasts for long periods of time, vomiting, stomach cramping, stomach pain, long-term diarrhea, constipation, pain in your intestines, edema, so holding on to fluids, hair loss, motor neuropathy, or feeling extreme weakness in your muscles, again, muscle cramping, twitching, things like that. Abnormal heartbeat from what you're used to, so that's either a lot slower or a lot faster than normal, maybe some heart flutters, irregular menses. Now you're spotting, or you aren't menstruating, or suddenly your flow is very heavy. Low blood pressure, so usually that's defined as anything under 90/60. Low blood sugar, which is usually defined as anything below 70 milligrams per deciliter. Confusion, shortness of breath, excessive thirst and like your mouth is really dry, but you just can't drink enough water. And lastly, if you start noticing that you're obsessing over seconds and minutes of when you should be eating and when you should not, that's also a warning sign. Not from the physical, like there's a physical problem, but that there may be something going on up here. Other than that, we're totally done. We're closing the page. We're closing the page on this. I've been talking for an hour. Why do I talk so much, you guys? I talk so much and then it takes me days to edit these videos. Let me know what y'all think in the comments below. Let me know if you've tried fasting, what your experience is, if you have any questions for me regarding intermittent fasting, or just say hi. Hope you all have a wonderful week. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video. I need somebody standing here telling me just to shut up, like right now. Why am I talking? Take a drink every time I say intermittent fasting. There goes my hair migration. There goes the hair migration. Is there like a magnet here for hair? I don't know. I just had a bubble form on my teeth. Can notifications stop going off, please? I set that notification. That's my fault. What the hell is that? Dude. Until I look like this. I'm like, hey everybody, la 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 la. Like I look like Cousin It. Am I Cousin It? Hello. I'm a complete amateur.